The morning mist clings to the rolling hills of feudal Japan, shrouding the landscape in an eerie calm. Cherry blossoms drift lazily through the air, their delicate petals contrasting sharply with the harsh reality that lies beneath. Blood has long soaked these lands, and yet the land itself seems indifferent, as if silently observing the cycles of honor, death, and discipline that define the samurai. Here, beauty and brutality exist side by side. The samurai, the warrior class of Japan, are both the guardians and the destroyers, bound by a code of honor that demands absolute loyalty, unflinching courage, and a willingness to embrace death without hesitation. The paradox of the samurai is striking. From the outside, they appear as figures of elegance and refinement, moving through courtly ceremonies, tending gardens, or practicing calligraphy. Yet beneath this polished exterior lies a heart hardened by relentless training, a mind disciplined to suppress empathy, and a body honed to perform acts of lethal precision. Mercy, whether toward friend, foe, or even oneself, is a weakness that cannot be tolerated. Every movement, every breath, every thought is calibrated to serve the imperatives of duty and survival. Their lives are an intricate dance between life and death, grace and violence, compassion and cruelty. This story is not merely about warriors wielding swords. It is a journey into the very psychology of the samurai, a culture where young children are exposed to death at an age when most are still learning to walk, and where the line between life and ritualized death is deliberately blurred. The samurai are trained to see the world through a lens of detachment, understanding that hesitation can be fatal. Pain is not to be feared, suffering is not to be lamented, and mercy is not to be offered. Even toward themselves, they are expected to act with merciless precision. From the first flickers of dawn, the samurai's life is a series of tests of strength, endurance, loyalty, and above all, the capacity to confront death calmly. Families dedicate themselves to this path, sacrificing comfort, security, and sometimes sanity, so that their sons might embody the ideals of Bushido. In this world, love and violence are inseparable. The tender care of a parent exists alongside the harsh lessons of combat training. Even in moments of beauty, the ever-present shadow of mortality lingers, a reminder that life is fleeting and only discipline can grant control over it. The landscape of feudal Japan itself seems to shape these warriors. Misty mountains, dense forests, and narrow river valleys become classrooms for survival, testing not only physical skill but mental resilience. Each tree, each stone, each quiet corner of a temple could conceal a threat. The samurai are conditioned to move through this world alert, aware, and detached. Death is not only a possibility, it is an inevitability. And yet, paradoxically, this awareness of mortality is what gives them life, focus, and a strange kind of freedom. This introduction serves as a doorway into a world few outsiders truly understand. The samurai are at once noble and terrifying, disciplined and cruel, human and something beyond human. Their training to feel no mercy, even for themselves, is not an aberration but a cultural imperative, a philosophy embedded in every act of living and dying. By exploring their upbringing, their rituals, and their psychological conditioning, we begin to grasp not only how they became fearsome warriors, but how they embodied a worldview where death, honor, and cruelty were inseparable. It is a world of contrast, the soft beauty of falling petals overlaid with the hardened steel of a sharpened katana, serene temples shadowed by the imminence of bloodshed, the calm gaze of a warrior who has learned that compassion is a liability. As the story unfolds, the audience will witness how the samurai were forged, mentally, physically, and spiritually, into beings capable of executing violence with the detachment of meditation, embracing death as a daily companion, and denying mercy even to themselves. The stage is set for a journey into a culture where mercy is forbidden, and the human spirit is tested against the harshest of truths. The way of the samurai, Bushido, was far more than a code of honor. It was a philosophy of life and death, a relentless training of mind, body, and soul that demanded absolute devotion. In this world, existence was measured not in years but in the mastery of discipline, the perfection of skill, and the readiness to meet death at any moment. To the outside observer, Bushido might appear noble, even poetic, a harmonious blend of loyalty, courage, and etiquette. But beneath its veneer of refinement lay a dark truth. The samurai were conditioned to feel no mercy, no hesitation, and no attachment to life itself. Every action, every choice, every breath was governed by a strict mental calculus, a ruthless preparation for the inevitability of violence. From an early age, the young samurai was immersed in a world designed to cultivate detachment and lethal efficiency. Philosophy and religion interwove with martial discipline. Confucian teachings reinforced loyalty to one's lord and family, stressing duty above personal desire. Zen Buddhism, with its paradoxical meditations and rigorous mental exercises, taught detachment from worldly fear and emotion. Children were instructed to embrace impermanence, to confront the transient nature of life as a daily practice. Meditation was not optional, it was a weapon, a means of training the mind to act without hesitation, to enter the battlefield with clarity, and to accept death as a natural companion. The discipline of the samurai extended far beyond meditation. The world around them, from the architecture of their castles to the layout of their villages, reflected and reinforced their worldview. Training grounds were designed not just for physical combat but for psychological conditioning. Misty hills and dense forests became classrooms of survival, every uneven stone or hidden ravine a test of alertness, adaptability, and courage. Swordsmanship was not merely a technique, it was a philosophy, a method of internalizing control, presence, and the merciless efficiency of killing. Even the simplest gestures, like the way a bow was drawn or a foot placed, became a ritual imbued with intent and lethal potential. Yet, Bushido was not solely about preparation for external battles. Its greatest demand was internal, the mastery of oneself. The samurai was expected to suppress fear, to silence compassion, and to neutralize hesitation. Love and empathy, while not condemned outright, were considered vulnerabilities that could jeopardize survival. The cultivation of an emotionless mind was paramount. A samurai could not allow the screams of the wounded, the pleas of an enemy, or the pangs of conscience to interfere with duty. Even the thought of self-preservation could be dangerous. The ultimate warrior faced death as naturally as breathing. Life itself was subordinate to honor, and dishonor, whether through cowardice, disloyalty, or moral weakness, was a fate far worse than death. The psychological weight of this philosophy cannot be overstated. To live as a samurai was to inhabit a world constantly on the knife's edge. The mind was conditioned to anticipate violence, to accept it, and to respond without hesitation. Young warriors were frequently exposed to scenarios designed to test their reactions, simulated attacks, sudden confrontations, and ritualized combat that blurred the line between training and life-threatening experience. Each exercise stripped away fear and cultivated a ruthless clarity. Over time, the repeated exposure to danger and discipline transformed instinct. Hesitation became impossible, mercy became foreign, and even the concept of self-preservation was subordinated to duty. This relentless cultivation of detachment extended to relationships and social interactions. Samurai were trained to prioritize loyalty to their lord and clan above all else, including family ties and personal bonds. Love, friendship, and familial affection were never discarded, but they were tempered with constant vigilance and mental discipline. The ideal samurai was capable of immense tenderness and artistic refinement, composing poetry, tending gardens, or performing calligraphy, while simultaneously being able to execute a foe without a moment's pause. The tension between beauty and brutality, empathy and efficiency, was never reconciled. It was embraced as a defining characteristic of their existence. The broader cultural context reinforced these ideals. Feudal Japan was a society of hierarchies, honor, and perpetual conflict. Battles were frequent, and political intrigue was deadly. A samurai's failure could bring shame not only on himself but on his entire family. Death in service, whether at the hands of an enemy or through ritual suicide, was often glorified. To the samurai, the choice was never whether to face death, but how, with dignity, discipline, and unwavering adherence to Bushido. The concept of mercy, particularly toward oneself, was considered a dangerous indulgence. a distraction that could compromise the integrity of the code. The paradox of Bushido is compelling. It demanded both emotional suppression and profound awareness. A samurai was taught to act without hesitation yet to fully perceive the beauty, impermanence, and fragility of life. A cherry blossom's bloom could be admired even on the edge of a battlefield. The serenity of a temple could be appreciated while preparing for imminent combat. This constant oscillation between awareness and detachment, empathy and ruthlessness, is what forged the fearsome psychological makeup of the samurai. They were alive to the world's beauty yet utterly unshaken by its horrors. In essence, the way of the samurai created a warrior capable of supreme efficiency in both thought and action, conditioned to confront death with calm precision and to deny mercy even to themselves. Their philosophy was not a hollow code of conduct. It was an all-encompassing mental and spiritual architecture, meticulously designed to produce humans who could thrive in the chaos of battle while remaining unswayed by pain, fear, or moral hesitation. By understanding Bushido, we begin to see why the samurai were more than mere soldiers. They were living embodiments of discipline, detachment, and the terrifying beauty of a mind trained to feel no mercy. The life of a samurai began long before the first sword was drawn or the first battle fought. From the earliest age, children were immersed in a world that blurred the line between innocence and preparation for death. Unlike other societies, where childhood was a period of play and discovery, the young samurai was subjected to a rigorous regime designed to forge both body and mind into instruments of discipline and lethal efficiency. Every moment, every lesson, every hardship was calculated to instill the ability to act without hesitation, to confront fear without faltering, and to accept the inevitability of mortality with calm detachment. Parents and mentors understood that the seeds of a warrior's mentality had to be planted early. Even before boys could lift a wooden sword properly, they were introduced to the realities of life and death. Stories of legendary battles, fallen heroes, and dishonorable deaths were recounted not as cautionary tales but as moral blueprints. Young samurai were taught that shame could be more devastating than the sword itself, and that fear or hesitation was a path to ruin. These lessons were reinforced with visual and visceral experiences. Children were often present at public executions, witnessing the grim consequences of failure, disloyalty, or cowardice. The sight of blood, the sound of a decapitated head hitting the ground, and the stoic composure of those facing death were all absorbed as crucial parts of their education. Physical conditioning was equally relentless. From dawn, children engaged in exercises designed to build strength, agility, and endurance beyond normal human limits. Long runs through dense forests, climbing rocky hills, and swimming in frigid rivers were common. They were exposed to extreme temperatures, hunger, and fatigue, each session pushing them to their mental and physical limits. Pain was not punished, it was revered as a teacher. A cut, a bruise, or exhaustion was evidence that the child was learning to endure, to suppress instinctive fear, and to internalize control over the body. Every hardship was framed as preparation for the battlefield, every struggle a rehearsal for the ultimate confrontation with death. Yet the true test of samurai childhood lay in psychological conditioning. Fear, compassion, and attachment had to be neutralized. Exercises were designed to confront children with death and suffering in ways that forced them to respond without hesitation. Some were exposed to injured animals, learning to act decisively without succumbing to pity. Others were placed in controlled combat scenarios where they had to strike or be struck, cultivating a clinical detachment from pain, both inflicted and received. Mentors would observe closely, noting which children hesitated, which recoiled, and which responded with the calm ruthlessness expected of a samurai. These early lessons were crucial. A moment's hesitation in the chaos of battle could mean death, not only for oneself but for comrades and one's clan. Education was not limited to physical and psychological conditioning. The young samurai was taught strategy, philosophy, and the intricate rituals of Bushido. Calligraphy, poetry, and literature were not frivolous pursuits but tools to refine focus, patience, and mental acuity. Zen meditation sessions were common, often conducted in austere settings with little comfort, teaching the mind to observe without attachment and act without hesitation. In these quiet moments, children learned that detachment from emotion was not cruelty but mastery, a necessary precondition for survival and honor. Even play was structured, designed to teach tactical thinking, quick decision-making, and risk assessment. Every lesson, no matter how small, contributed to the construction of a warrior's mind, capable of operating with precision under pressure. The intensity of samurai childhood could be overwhelming, and the stakes were clear. Failure to internalize these lessons meant not only personal shame but the potential downfall of one's family and clan. Every samurai lineage carried with it the weight of history, expectation, and reputation. Boys were reminded constantly that they were heirs to a tradition where honor was paramount, cowardice intolerable, and death inevitable. In this way, their training was as much about instilling loyalty and moral discipline as it was about cultivating physical skill and courage. A samurai's identity was inseparable from the code. Their sense of self was forged in a crucible of expectation and trial. Perhaps the most harrowing aspect of this upbringing was the cultivation of detachment toward one's own life. From an early age, samurai children were confronted with the reality of their mortality in ways designed to normalize the idea of death as ever-present and intimate. Some were required to witness ritual suicides, understanding the solemnity and dignity of taking one's own life for honor. Others were drilled in scenarios simulating mortal peril, learning to suppress instinctive panic and act with calm efficiency. The ultimate goal was clear. A samurai must never flinch, must never hesitate, and must never allow mercy toward oneself to cloud judgment. Life was a tool, death an inevitability, and the mind's clarity was the only path to true mastery. Social interactions within the household and community reinforced these lessons. Young samurai learned to navigate complex hierarchies, to respect elders without fear, to command without cruelty, and to observe without attachment. Games, competitions, and ceremonies were all infused with elements of discipline and moral testing. Even celebrations, festivals, and religious observances were used as subtle training grounds, teaching patience, attention to detail, and composure under scrutiny. The child's world, though small, was a microcosm of the larger battles, alliances, and rivalries they would face as adult warriors. By the time they reached adolescence, samurai children had been transformed. The relentless combination of physical trials, psychological conditioning, philosophical education, and ritual exposure had forged individuals capable of extraordinary focus, resilience, and ruthlessness. They were no longer merely boys. They were living instruments of discipline, prepared to embrace death, to execute violence without hesitation, and to suppress mercy even for themselves. The childhood of a samurai was not a period of innocence but a carefully orchestrated crucible, designed to create warriors who could navigate a world where honor and mortality were inseparable, and where the capacity to act without hesitation could mean the difference between glory and annihilation. Through this intense upbringing, we begin to understand the paradox of the samurai, beings of refined beauty and terrifying efficiency, trained from birth to navigate the extremes of life and death with a mind capable of profound detachment. Their childhood was a prelude to the life of relentless discipline and merciless action that would define them, revealing how deeply culture, philosophy, and psychological engineering combined to create warriors who were unmatched in their skill, loyalty, and capacity for controlled cruelty. The stage was set for the next phase of their transformation, the deliberate, merciless mastery of the art of killing itself. Combat for the samurai was never simply a matter of physical prowess. It was an intricate, almost sacred discipline that fused the mind, body, and spirit into a single instrument of lethal efficiency. Every movement, every strike, every breath was imbued with intention, honed over years of rigorous training that blurred the boundaries between meditation and murder. For the samurai, killing was not an act of anger or impulse, but a form of execution that demanded total presence, unwavering focus, and absolute detachment. The blade became an extension of the self, and mastery over it required mastery over fear, hesitation, and emotion. To falter was not only dangerous, it was dishonorable. From adolescence onward, training became increasingly severe. Sparring with wooden swords evolved into the use of live blades, and what began as controlled practice gradually escalated into scenarios designed to simulate the chaos of battle. Young warriors were taught to strike with precision, to read the movements of their opponents, and to anticipate attacks before they occurred. Even minor hesitation could mean defeat or death. Repetition was relentless, with each lesson reinforcing the psychological principle that hesitation is fatal and mercy is a liability. In this way, the samurai's mind was conditioned to respond with mechanical precision, treating life and death with equal detachment. The psychological intensity of these exercises was as demanding as the physical rigor. Samurai were taught to embrace violence not as cruelty, but as a natural function of existence. Killing was framed as a meditative act, a moment in which all distractions were stripped away and only the clarity of purpose remained. Instructors often emphasized the importance of calm observation, teaching their students to suppress instinctive hesitation and emotion while remaining hyper-aware of their surroundings. The ideal samurai could stand amidst chaos, observe every movement, and execute lethal decisions with a serenity that would seem inhuman to the untrained eye. Weapon mastery was central to this process. The katana, the samurai's signature blade, was not merely a tool of combat. It was a symbol of honor and a measure of discipline. Training with the katana required the coordination of the entire body, the precision of breath, and the timing of the mind. Archery, spear work, and grappling were also integrated into a comprehensive martial education, each discipline reinforcing the principle that control over oneself was the foundation for control over life and death. These skills were drilled relentlessly, often under harsh conditions that simulated battlefield stress. Fatigue, inclement weather, and limited visibility tested both endurance and mental focus. Equally significant was the cultivation of emotional detachment. Samurai were trained to suppress empathy, fear, and even self-preservation instincts in combat scenarios. Through repeated exposure to simulated and real danger, they learned to confront the reality of death, both their own and that of others, without flinching. A successful warrior could strike decisively at an opponent, assess the battlefield with clarity, and move without hesitation, unaffected by cries, pleas, or the gruesome spectacle of violence. Mercy, once again, was considered a weakness that could compromise survival, honor, and discipline. The classroom of combat extended beyond formal training grounds. Forests, rivers, and mountains became arenas for survival exercises. Ambushes were staged, stealth attacks simulated, and endurance tests conducted to push the limits of both body and mind. Young samurai learned to strike from shadows, move silently, and maintain composure under stress. Every environment, every scenario, became an opportunity to cultivate an unshakable, almost unnatural calm, even in the face of imminent danger. By the time they faced actual warfare, these warriors had internalized the principle that hesitation equaled death and clarity equaled survival. Ritualized sparring also played a crucial role in psychological conditioning. Matches were conducted with strict attention to form, honor, and mental discipline, yet they carried the intensity and stakes of real combat. The emphasis was not on winning or losing but on mastering the self, controlling fear, suppressing emotion, and executing technique flawlessly. A samurai who allowed pride, anger, or hesitation to interfere was not merely unprepared, he was a danger to himself and to his comrades. Through these exercises, young warriors internalized the principle that action must be decisive, swift, and merciless. The samurai's exposure to death during training went beyond simulation. Historical accounts tell of warriors being placed in situations where they were forced to confront the suffering or demise of others. Witnessing such events, rather than causing trauma, was intended to normalize the reality of death and to instill a calm, rational approach to violence. Instructors emphasized the moral dimension. Killing was permissible when aligned with duty and honor, but hesitation or weakness was intolerable. In this way, combat became both a technical skill and a philosophical exercise, merging ethics with lethal proficiency. The transformation wrought by this training was profound. By the end of adolescence, samurai had developed a mind capable of navigating the extremes of life and death without fear or hesitation. Their reflexes, judgment, and perception were honed to perfection, and their understanding of violence became detached, almost meditative. Every encounter, every strike, every decision in combat was an act of precision and control. Mercy, in any form, had no place in this calculus, not toward enemies, civilians, or even themselves. The samurai had become instruments of disciplined lethality, living embodiments of a philosophy that demanded mastery over all aspects of the self. Yet the mercilessness of their training was never mechanical. It was intertwined with moral and spiritual understanding. Samurai were taught that their efficiency in killing was not cruelty but the fulfillment of duty, a reflection of their honor, and a demonstration of their commitment to Bushido. This fusion of morality, philosophy, and violence created a psychological paradox. Warriors capable of executing life and death decisions with clinical precision, yet simultaneously aware of beauty, honor, and the fragility of life. It was this balance, or tension, that distinguished a samurai from a mere soldier. Through relentless combat training, the samurai cultivated a terrifying duality. They were both human and beyond human, capable of empathy and appreciation of beauty, yet equally capable of detachment and deadly efficiency. By the time they reached adulthood, they had internalized a philosophy that required absolute control over themselves and absolute decisiveness in action. Killing became not an emotional response but a deliberate, meditative execution, a reflection of their discipline, their philosophy, and the merciless code they were sworn to uphold. In essence, the samurai transformed the act of combat into an art form, a form of psychological and physical mastery where hesitation was obliterated, mercy was forbidden, and the mind became sharper than any blade. This mastery of violence, both external and internal, was the culmination of years of disciplined training, and it revealed the terrifying beauty of a culture that taught men to embrace death and deny mercy, even to themselves. The samurai were no longer merely warriors. They were living embodiments of the lethal philosophy that defined feudal Japan. Among the many facets of samurai culture, none is as haunting or as revealing as the ritual of seppuku, the act of suicide performed with strict ceremonial precision. To the outside world, the concept is almost unfathomable. A human being deliberately ending their own life, not out of despair or impulsivity, but as an expression of honor, discipline, and duty. Yet within the philosophy of Bushido, seppuku was the ultimate affirmation of control over oneself, the final testament to a life lived in strict adherence to the code. Even in death, mercy, especially toward oneself, was forbidden. The act was not a surrender but a demonstration of mastery, a declaration that the warrior remained unyielding in life and in death. The ritual itself was meticulously structured, a fusion of solemnity, discipline, and stark brutality. Samurai preparing for seppuku would dress in pristine white robes, symbolizing purity and detachment from worldly attachments. They would often compose a final poem, a deeply personal reflection of their life, honor, and impending death. The presence of witnesses was essential. Family members, comrades, and sometimes lords would observe, ensuring that the act upheld the standards of ritual and dignity. A trusted attendant, known as a kaishakunin, would stand ready with a sword to deliver a merciful decapitation at the precise moment, sparing prolonged suffering but allowing the warrior to maintain control until that final instant. The psychological preparation for seppuku was as demanding as the physical act itself. Samurai were conditioned from childhood to confront death calmly, to suppress instinctive fear and hesitation. By the time they performed seppuku, they were capable of enduring unimaginable pain without flinching, guided by the belief that honor was worth more than life itself. The act was not performed in a frenzy or out of despair. It was executed with the same deliberate precision and mental clarity that had been cultivated through years of rigorous training. In this way, seppuku became both a personal crucible and a public demonstration of the principles of Bushido. The stakes were high. Failure to perform seppuku correctly was a fate worse than death. Hesitation, tremors, or even the slightest expression of fear could bring shame not only on the individual but also on their family and clan. The very concept of mercy, even toward oneself, was anathema. To falter was to dishonor generations and tarnish a lineage. In this sense, the ritual was both a personal and social imperative, an act that reinforced the samurai's identity as a being who had transcended the ordinary limits of human attachment and fear. Seppuku also served as a form of political and social regulation. Lords could command a warrior to perform the ritual as punishment for failure, disloyalty, or perceived cowardice. In these cases, the act of self-inflicted death became a tool of societal control, a way to enforce discipline and uphold the strict hierarchies of feudal Japan. Yet even when imposed externally, the ritual was deeply personal. The samurai confronted the ultimate existential challenge with composure, transforming what might have been a moment of humiliation into a final affirmation of self-mastery. Death, in this context, was not an escape but a deliberate statement of the warrior's philosophy and unwavering adherence to Bushido. The preparation for seppuku often included mental rehearsals as rigorous as the physical training endured throughout life. Samurai would meditate, reflecting on the impermanence of existence and the transience of all worldly concerns. Breath control, posture, and mental visualization were meticulously refined. Pain was anticipated, yet it was never allowed to dominate consciousness. By embracing the inevitability of suffering, the samurai demonstrated not weakness but supreme psychological control. The act was as much about demonstrating mastery over the mind as it was over the body, a final testament to a life lived in the relentless pursuit of discipline. There were variations in how seppuku was carried out, reflecting both regional traditions and individual circumstances. Some warriors performed the ritual in solitude, in a quiet garden or temple courtyard, emphasizing personal reflection and the inner journey toward death. Others executed the ritual before assembled witnesses, transforming it into a public spectacle of honor and discipline. Regardless of setting, the underlying principle remained the same. The samurai must face death with calm, precision, and unwavering adherence to the code. Even in the final moments, mercy was prohibited. The act was an assertion of control, not surrender. The broader cultural implications of seppuku reveal the extraordinary psychological engineering of samurai society. By normalizing death as a deliberate, controlled act, samurai were taught to view life as a tool to be wielded with precision and honor, rather than a possession to be clung to. Fear of death was not eradicated. Rather, it was harnessed, refined, and subordinated to the dictates of duty and philosophy. The samurai who could face the act of taking their own life with serenity embodied the pinnacle of Bushido, a mind and body disciplined beyond ordinary human limits, capable of detachment, clarity, and decisive action. Seppuku also reinforced the paradoxical nature of the samurai's relationship with life and death. While the act itself was violent and horrifying, it was performed with dignity, ritual, and aesthetic consideration. The samurai's world was one in which the most extreme forms of suffering could coexist with beauty and meaning. A meticulously arranged ceremonial knife, a carefully chosen white robe, the quiet presence of onlookers, all these elements transformed the act from mere violence into a statement of philosophical and cultural significance. Even in the act of self-destruction, the samurai remained bound by discipline, honor, and the ethical framework that had governed their entire existence. Through seppuku, the samurai's training to feel no mercy, even toward themselves, reached its ultimate expression. Every aspect of the ritual, from preparation to execution, demanded unwavering composure, control, and adherence to principle. Life was subordinated to honor, emotion was subordinated to duty, and even the instinct for survival was subordinated to the imperatives of Bushido. The ritual illustrates the terrifying psychological precision cultivated over years of childhood conditioning, martial training, and philosophical study. It reveals a worldview in which death is not merely accepted but embraced as the highest expression of discipline, and where mercy, even toward oneself, is a forbidden indulgence. In witnessing the ritual of seppuku, one begins to understand the full scope of the samurai's merciless training. It was not designed merely to create warriors capable of killing others. It was intended to create human beings capable of complete mastery over life, death, and the self. Through relentless discipline, philosophical study, and ritual exposure, the samurai internalized a mindset in which hesitation, mercy, and fear were obliterated. Death became a tool, suffering a teacher, and the self a vessel for the perfection of the code. In this haunting intersection of beauty, ritual, and cruelty, the samurai revealed the terrifying and awe-inspiring potential of the human mind conditioned to feel no mercy, even for itself. The true mastery of a samurai was not measured by the sharpness of their blade or the speed of their strike, but by the resilience and clarity of their mind. While physical skill could be honed and tested, the inner world, the emotions, fears, and instincts that governed human behavior, required far more deliberate and relentless training. The fearless mind of the samurai was the product of years of psychological conditioning, philosophical instruction, and exposure to both pain and death. This mental fortitude was essential because, on the battlefield or in moments of ritual decision, hesitation could be fatal, and compassion could be a liability. To survive, to achieve honor, and to wield their deadly art effectively, a samurai had to train their mind to feel nothing unnecessary, no mercy, no fear, and ultimately, no self-preservation in the ordinary sense. From an early age, samurai were immersed in exercises that deliberately tested their mental thresholds. Meditation was not a passive activity but a rigorous discipline, often performed under austere conditions. Cold stone floors, sparse rooms, and extended periods of stillness were standard, forcing the young warrior to confront discomfort, boredom, and the pull of instinct. Breath control and visualization were employed to cultivate focus, teaching the mind to remain calm under extreme stress. A samurai learned to observe fear without succumbing to it, to acknowledge danger without distraction, and to let instinct serve discipline rather than dictate action. These exercises created a psychological architecture capable of sustaining clarity amidst chaos, a hallmark of the fearless warrior. Exposure to trauma was another cornerstone of mental conditioning. Samurai were deliberately placed in situations where they confronted the reality of suffering and death. They might witness brutal punishments, observe battlefield injuries, or participate in controlled sparring with life or death stakes. The purpose was not cruelty for its own sake but the creation of mental immunity to fear and hesitation. Each encounter trained the brain to respond to danger with rational calculation rather than emotional reaction. Over time, the young warrior's mind adapted, pain became a signal to be understood rather than feared, and the presence of death became a familiar, almost neutral backdrop to daily life. Emotional detachment was cultivated with equal rigor. Compassion, while valued socially and morally in limited contexts, was considered a dangerous interference when it came to combat or duty. Samurai were taught that allowing pity or sympathy to dictate action could compromise not only personal survival but also the honor of their lord and clan. This detachment extended even to family and self. Mercy toward oneself was forbidden, as it could weaken resolve in the face of ultimate decisions such as seppuku or battlefield sacrifice. Through repetition, observation, and philosophical reflection, samurai learned to compartmentalize emotion, to treat life and death with equanimity, and to act with calm precision even in the most horrifying circumstances. Philosophy reinforced these psychological techniques. Zen Buddhism, in particular, played a central role in shaping the fearless mind. The Zen practice of observing reality without attachment taught samurai to perceive the impermanence of life, the inevitability of suffering, and the necessity of acting decisively. Koans and meditative paradoxes train the mind to embrace uncertainty, to accept the unknowable, and to find clarity through stillness. Death, rather than being feared or mourned, was understood as a natural part of existence, a teacher and a constant companion. This integration of philosophy and training created a mental framework in which fear was not erased but transformed into a tool for disciplined action. The social and environmental context of the samurai further reinforced this mindset. Feudal Japan was a landscape of constant tension, from political intrigue to skirmishes and open warfare. A samurai's survival depended on the ability to act decisively, anticipate threats, and remain unshaken by unpredictability. This external reality demanded internal mastery, a mind that could assess danger without panic, respond with calculated action, and suppress hesitation or mercy that might interfere with duty. Nature itself served as both teacher and test. Harsh winters, rugged terrain, and isolated mountain passes became venues for mental resilience training. Each challenge, each encounter with the unpredictability of the world, honed the capacity for detachment and fearlessness. Ritualized practices also reinforced the fearless mind. Seppuku, battlefield simulations, and strict adherence to etiquette required samurai to act without distraction, to maintain composure under scrutiny, and to internalize control over every aspect of their behavior. These rituals were psychologically demanding, as failure to uphold standards could result in humiliation, dishonor, or death. The repetition of such high-stakes experiences created neural pathways in the brain, strengthening the capacity for calm decision-making, emotional regulation, and the suppression of unnecessary empathy or self-concern. Over time, the samurai developed a mind as disciplined as their body, capable of withstanding stress, confronting death, and executing violence with precision. The consequences of this mental conditioning were profound. A samurai could face an enemy or even death itself with equanimity, making decisions that were brutally efficient yet philosophically coherent. Their perception of the world was sharp, their judgment uncompromising, and their ability to act free from emotional interference nearly absolute. This combination of clarity and detachment created a paradoxical figure, capable of both profound artistry and terrifying violence, able to compose poetry or conduct tea ceremonies with elegance while simultaneously executing a foe with unwavering precision. The fearless mind allowed the samurai to inhabit extremes, beauty and cruelty, serenity and chaos, without losing control. However, this training came at a psychological cost. The relentless suppression of fear, compassion, and self-preservation could lead to isolation, obsession, or existential detachment. Samurai were human beings conditioned to operate beyond ordinary emotional limits, and the burden of this mastery was heavy. Yet, within their cultural framework, these traits were not considered flaws but the hallmarks of true excellence. To feel mercy or hesitation in critical moments was weakness. To act decisively without emotional interference was virtue. The fearless mind, then, was both a weapon and a responsibility, a psychological achievement that demanded lifelong cultivation and unwavering commitment. Through meditation, exposure to trauma, rigorous discipline, and philosophical study, the samurai transformed their minds into instruments capable of extraordinary clarity and detachment. Fear was acknowledged but subordinated, pain was encountered but controlled. Life and death were observed with equanimity and acted upon with precision. Mercy, even toward oneself, was rigorously denied. This mental architecture allowed samurai not merely to survive but to dominate in a world defined by unpredictability, violence, and honor. Their fearless mind was the culmination of a lifetime of training, the unseen blade behind the katana, and the defining characteristic of a warrior culture that demanded perfection in both body and soul. In understanding the samurai's fearless mind, one begins to grasp the full extent of their psychological engineering. They were conditioned to operate at the extremes of human capacity, capable of extraordinary focus, ruthless action, and complete detachment. Every ritual, every trial, every exposure to danger or death served to refine their mental resilience. By denying themselves mercy, they achieved a terrifying and awe-inspiring mastery over fear, compassion, and hesitation. The fearless mind was not an innate trait but the result of meticulous, relentless, and often brutal training, a testament to the terrifying precision of a culture that sought to produce warriors who could confront life and death with absolute clarity and unyielding discipline. The battlefield was the ultimate testing ground for the samurai, a theater in which the lessons of childhood, the discipline of combat training, and the cultivation of the fearless mind were put to their most harrowing trial. Here, in the chaos of clashing swords and cries of the dying, the samurai's philosophy of mercy denial, detachment, and unwavering duty was tested in its purest and most terrifying form. Unlike modern conceptions of war, the samurai did not fight solely for strategy or territory. They fought to uphold honor, to serve their lord, and to embody the principles of Bushido. Every strike was a moral act as much as a tactical one, every decision a reflection of a lifetime of conditioning designed to eliminate hesitation and suppress mercy. On the battlefield, sensory overload was constant. The clash of blades rang like a percussive drum, punctuated by the screams of the wounded and the thunder of hooves. The smell of blood, smoke, and sweat saturated the air, a relentless reminder of mortality and chaos. Amidst this maelstrom, the samurai had to act with clarity, perceiving danger and opportunity simultaneously, anticipating movements of allies and foes alike, and striking decisively without hesitation. Years of training had conditioned them to filter out distraction, to observe without emotional interference, and to execute with lethal precision. Every instant demanded total presence, every lapse could mean death, for oneself or one's comrades. The mental discipline cultivated through years of meditation and exposure to trauma was indispensable here. Fear, while recognized, was never allowed to dictate action. A samurai could stand before a superior force, witness the suffering of allies, or observe the death of a comrade, and yet remain composed, executing their duty with unwavering focus. Mercy, either toward the enemy or toward oneself, was systematically excluded from the equation. The warrior's mind functioned as a finely tuned instrument, able to process extreme sensory input, assess risks, and act decisively while the human instinct for compassion or self-preservation was suppressed. Battlefield tactics emphasized speed, decisiveness, and psychological dominance. Samurai formations and individual maneuvers were designed to exploit both physical and mental weaknesses in the opponent. Swift strikes, feints, and ambushes were executed with precision, often leaving the enemy bewildered before realizing the danger. Every action was guided by the dual imperatives of survival and honor. Hesitation was fatal, but so too was cowardice, which could bring shame to one's family and clan. The battlefield was a place where morality, discipline, and lethal skill converged, revealing the terrifying consequences of the samurai's merciless training. The human cost of this rigor was profound. Samurai were trained to suppress empathy and distance themselves from the suffering they inflicted or witnessed, yet the psychological weight of killing could never be entirely erased. Veterans of numerous campaigns often carried the invisible scars of violence, despite the detachment cultivated through training. Death was omnipresent, yet each loss reinforced the discipline of the survivors. The suppression of mercy and the relentless confrontation with mortality created a breed of warriors both formidable and haunting, capable of extraordinary valor and efficiency, yet psychologically tempered by a life spent at the extremes of human experience. Ritualized behavior extended even into the chaos of combat. Samurai adhered to strict codes of conduct, emphasizing respect for the enemy, honor in victory, and dignity in death. This paradoxical combination of mercy denial and ethical structure created a unique psychological environment. The samurai could execute lethal force without hesitation, yet they were guided by an internal moral compass that dictated the appropriate circumstances and manner of killing. Discipline was maintained not through emotion but through adherence to principle, turning every act of violence into a deliberate, controlled, and morally infused performance. The battlefield also revealed the full implications of denying mercy to oneself. Samurai faced extreme conditions, exhaustion, injury, hunger, and the constant threat of death, and were trained to endure all without faltering. Even when facing the prospect of their own death, they were expected to act with calm precision, neither panicking nor seeking escape. Their fearlessness was not the absence of instinctual human reaction, but the triumph of discipline over impulse. This internal mastery transformed the act of combat into a ritualized expression of Bushido. Each strike, each movement, each life or death decision was a testament to the samurai's lifelong preparation, a chilling demonstration of the human capacity for controlled ruthlessness. Witnessing the battlefield through the lens of a samurai reveals the paradox of beauty and horror that define their existence. The choreography of combat, the arcs of blades, the precision of maneuvers, the disciplined coordination of formations, possessed a grim elegance. Yet this beauty was inseparable from violence, suffering, and mortality. The samurai's entire life had been a preparation for this moment, to navigate the extremes of human experience, to act decisively where others might hesitate, and to maintain honor and clarity amidst the brutality of death. Every aspect of their training converged here, and the battlefield became a theater in which the philosophy of mercy denial, mental discipline, and fearless resolve was enacted in its purest form. The psychological consequences extended beyond the battlefield itself. Samurai returned from combat transformed, carrying with them both the pride of honor fulfilled and the burden of lives taken. Their training had prepared them to act without mercy, but it did not erase the existential weight of their actions. This tension, between the cultivated detachment necessary for survival and the inescapable human consciousness of life and death, defined the samurai as much as their martial skill. It was this delicate equilibrium that distinguished the truly great warriors from those who faltered under pressure, revealing how deeply the denial of mercy, even toward oneself, was woven into every aspect of their being. Through these experiences, the samurai's philosophy was both tested and reaffirmed. The battlefield was not merely a site of conflict. It was a proving ground for the mind, a crucible in which fear, hesitation, and compassion were stripped away, leaving only clarity, precision, and unyielding discipline. In this environment, the samurai's merciless training found its ultimate expression. The lessons learned from childhood, the years of physical conditioning, the cultivation of detachment, and the philosophical study of life and death coalesced into a singular psychological state, a mind capable of confronting mortality with calm, executing violence with precision, and denying mercy both to the enemy and to oneself. In understanding the battlefield through the eyes of a samurai, one gains a chilling appreciation for the depth and intensity of their training. They were not merely warriors, they were living embodiments of a philosophy that fused ethics, discipline, and lethal skill into a single, terrifyingly effective being. The denial of mercy, the mastery over fear, and the fearless embrace of death were not abstract ideals but practical necessities, forged through years of relentless preparation and tested under the harshest conditions imaginable. The battlefield, in all its chaos and horror, revealed the culmination of a lifetime of mental and physical conditioning. A human being elevated to a terrifying ideal, capable of extraordinary courage, efficiency, and detachment. The culmination of a samurai's life was not found in the battles they fought or the enemies they vanquished, but in the mastery of themselves, the absolute control over mind, body, and spirit that allowed them to confront death and deny mercy even toward themselves. By this stage of their journey, every lesson, every ritual, and every trial had converged into a singular philosophy, that true honor and discipline demanded total detachment from fear, hesitation, and compassion that could interfere with duty. This was the essence of Bushido, and it was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. To the samurai, the human instinct for mercy was a weakness. To suppress it was to transcend the ordinary boundaries of mortality and morality, stepping into a realm where discipline and precision governed every action. The moral and psychological climax of a samurai's existence lay in this paradox. Life was precious, yet disposable when honor demanded it. Pain was to be endured, yet leveraged as a teacher. Death was inevitable, yet to be confronted with calm, almost clinical, clarity. Even acts of violence were not gratuitous but carried meaning within the rigid ethical framework of Bushido. The samurai became a living embodiment of controlled chaos, capable of immense violence and yet guided by a strict moral compass. Every decision, whether on the battlefield, in ritual, or in personal reflection, was informed by the relentless training to feel no mercy, a principle that extended equally to others and to oneself. This philosophical apex was most visible in the rituals of death. Seppuku, once introduced, was not merely an act of self-destruction but the ultimate manifestation of the samurai's merciless discipline. By deliberately taking their own life, the samurai demonstrated mastery over fear, over pain, and over the instinct for survival. Every gesture, every movement, was executed with precision, reflecting years of conditioning designed to create perfect control over both body and mind. Witnesses understood that what they observed was not desperation, but the pinnacle of cultivated discipline. A person who had denied mercy even to themselves, choosing death with clarity and honor rather than yielding to instinctual fear. The battlefield reflected the same philosophy in action. A samurai's conduct amidst chaos was not dictated by emotion, pity, or hesitation, but by adherence to principle. Killing was neither cruel nor callous. It was deliberate, precise, and framed by an ethical structure that elevated the act beyond mere violence. Allies and enemies alike became elements within a moral and strategic calculus, their fates determined by the samurai's discipline and clarity. In this way, mercy was both unnecessary and forbidden, not from malice, but as a necessary condition for honor and survival. To act otherwise was to risk shame, failure, and the dishonor of one's lineage. Yet this philosophy was not devoid of reflection. The samurai's denial of mercy did not erase the human consciousness of suffering, morality, or death. Instead, it reframed these elements, transforming them into tools for discipline and clarity. Pain became a signal, fear became a guide, and death became a teacher. By confronting these extremes without hesitation, the samurai elevated ordinary experiences into profound lessons in control and moral precision. Their lives were a continuous meditation on the tension between human vulnerability and disciplined transcendence, a living demonstration of what could be achieved when instinct, emotion, and fear were mastered rather than suppressed. The emotional intensity of this philosophy was staggering. Samurai were human, capable of love, grief, and empathy, yet their culture demanded the suppression of these instincts in critical moments. They were trained to prioritize duty, honor, and principle above all else. This duality, the coexistence of human emotion with merciless discipline, created a psychological tension that defined the samurai at their peak. They were capable of profound acts of beauty and loyalty, yet equally capable of executing lethal force with clinical precision. Their training had conditioned them to navigate extremes without faltering, creating a mind capable of clarity in the most harrowing circumstances. The legacy of this philosophy extended beyond individual survival or battlefield success. By cultivating a mind that felt no mercy even toward itself, the samurai became instruments of cultural and political stability. Their discipline enforced hierarchies, upheld honor codes, and exemplified the ethical and philosophical ideals of feudal Japan. They were simultaneously terrifying and inspiring, living symbols of what humanity could achieve when fear, hesitation, and compassion were subordinated to principle. The denial of mercy was not cruelty for its own sake, but a deliberate, almost sacred, tool for maintaining order, honor, and the coherence of a warrior society. This moral and philosophical apex was both awe-inspiring and profoundly unsettling. Observers, whether contemporaries or later historians, often describe the samurai with a mix of admiration and horror. Their capacity for controlled ruthlessness, tempered by discipline and ethical reflection, represents one of the most extreme examples of human psychological conditioning. The deliberate denial of mercy, an instinct so fundamental to human empathy, required years of training, philosophical study, and personal sacrifice. In achieving this state, the samurai transcended ordinary human limits, embodying a philosophy that is as psychologically fascinating as it is morally challenging. In essence, the samurai's life was a continuous progression toward this moment, the integration of skill, mind, and spirit into a single, mercilessly disciplined being. Every childhood trial, every combat exercise, every ritual meditation, and every exposure to death contributed to the creation of a human capable of unparalleled focus, detachment, and clarity. Mercy, fear, and hesitation were systematically stripped away, leaving only precision, principle, and honor. The result was not a machine, but a human perfected through discipline, a being who could confront the extremes of life and death with unwavering composure, a living paradox of beauty and terror. Ultimately, the samurai's philosophy challenges our understanding of morality, human nature, and psychological potential. By denying mercy to themselves and others, they achieved a level of control over life, death, and emotion that few cultures have attempted. Their lives force us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of fear, the ethics of discipline, and the limits of human endurance. In this final stage, the samurai are not merely historical figures. They are a mirror reflecting the extremes of what the human mind can achieve and the terrifying beauty of a culture in which mercy was a forbidden indulgence. In contemplating the moral climax of the samurai, we are left with awe and unease. The denial of mercy, the fearless embrace of death, and the absolute commitment to principle reveal a culture capable of both extraordinary discipline and profound psychological intensity. It is a world in which honor eclipsed survival, discipline eclipsed instinct, and clarity eclipsed fear. The samurai, through centuries of training, ritual, and philosophical study, achieved a state of human mastery that is as fascinating as it is horrifying, a testament to the terrifying and sublime potential of the human mind when molded by discipline, philosophy, and relentless exposure to life's ultimate extremes. The legacy of the samurai reaches far beyond the battles they fought or the lands they defended. Their philosophy, forged in a world of honor, death, and unflinching discipline, created warriors capable of denying mercy even to themselves. This extreme training offers a profound insight into human potential, revealing what is possible when fear, hesitation, and compassion are systematically suppressed. The samurai's lives force us to confront uncomfortable questions about morality, discipline, and the psychological cost of perfection. Their example is both awe-inspiring and unsettling, a window into a culture where mercy was a forbidden indulgence. From childhood, samurai were conditioned to master their minds, suppress instinct, and confront suffering with clarity. Meditation, ritual, and exposure to trauma honed their focus, creating individuals capable of decisive action under extreme stress. Pain, death, and fear were not threats to be avoided but tools to be understood and mastered. This relentless psychological training produced humans whose minds were as disciplined as their bodies, capable of navigating the chaos of battle or the solemnity of seppuku with equal composure. Mercy, either toward others or themselves, was systematically denied, leaving only precision, principle, and honor. Yet the samurai's mercilessness was never senseless. Acts of violence and even self-inflicted death were framed by a strict ethical and philosophical code. Life was precious, yet disposable when honor demanded it. Death was inevitable, yet to be confronted with calm and purpose. Their denial of mercy was not cruelty but the expression of a disciplined mind, capable of extreme clarity and moral reasoning under circumstances that would overwhelm ordinary humans. This paradox, terrifying yet beautiful, is central to understanding their enduring fascination. The battlefield further amplified this philosophy. Samurai acted without hesitation, executing violence with precise efficiency while adhering to a moral framework. Fear was acknowledged but never allowed to govern action. Compassion, while present in social or personal contexts, was suppressed in moments requiring absolute clarity. This intense training transformed them into instruments of discipline, order, and controlled ruthlessness, capable of acts both horrific and necessary, guided by principle rather than impulse. The psychological and moral implications of their training are profound. By mastering fear and denying mercy, samurai achieved a form of human perfection, terrifying, disciplined, and morally precise. Yet this mastery carried costs: emotional detachment, isolation, and a constant proximity to death. Their lives were a delicate balance of beauty and horror, illustrating the extremes of what human minds can achieve when molded by philosophy, ritual, and relentless discipline. Even centuries later, the samurai continue to captivate our imagination. Literature, art, and popular culture romanticize their honor, courage, and discipline, yet the darker truth, the suppression of mercy and the relentless psychological training, remains essential to understanding them. They were humans pushed to the limits of their nature, capable of extraordinary control, decisiveness, and clarity in circumstances that would unseat most people. Their story is a mirror reflecting both the terrifying and awe-inspiring potential of disciplined human minds. Ultimately, the samurai challenge us to reflect on life, death, and human potential. Their philosophy encourages clarity, courage, and discipline, while simultaneously cautioning against the extremes of control divorced from empathy. They were men who confronted mortality with unwavering composure, denied themselves comfort, and navigated life's ultimate extremes with terrifying grace. Their legacy endures as a testament to both the power and peril of absolute mastery, leaving us with awe, unease, and profound respect for a culture that trained humans to feel no mercy, even toward themselves.